What does silence sound like? For me, it was a single line of text, arriving without warning, without subject, without even the courtesy of a name, effective immediately. Your base salary has been reduced by 45%. That was it. No salutation, no justification, no explanation. It came at 8:47 p.m., a time when no one reasonable sends anything important unless they don't want you to reply. I had been finalizing the last sequence of code for Pulse Sync, the AI-driven biometric device we'd been building for over a year. 14 months of my life, compressed into a few final lines of logic, meant to teach our algorithm how to read stress from rhythm and skin temperature. It was late, and I had stayed behind like I always did, by choice, by habit, by belief. The office around me was hush, the kind of hush that doesn't ask questions. Lights dimmed to half strength. Desks deserted. Elevators long quiet. Outside New York gleamed through the windows, wet pavement glinting under headlights. Voices carried in echoes, the city pulsing like it didn't know anything had changed. But something had. I hovered over the keyboard, index finger still resting on the shift key, unsure whether to scream or laugh. I didn't do either. Instead, I stared at the email until my eyes burned. Not laid off, not suspended, just less. Quietly, brutally, less. I didn't move. I didn't reach for my phone. I simply turned to my bag and pulled out the one thing that still felt mine, a small silver USB drive worn at the edges, always in the side pocket of my coat. It held everything. The original blueprints, the version before the edits, the clean copy. I wrapped my fingers around it like a charm, against something invisible, because deep down, I already knew this wasn't a budgeting mistake. It was a strategy, a way to trim me out of the frame softly, silently, without alarms, and the worst part wasn't the money. It was the message that I was no longer necessary, that I could be peeled away piece by piece until I stopped noticing, until I erased myself. But they miscalculated. I'd spent 14 months building a system meant to detect subtle changes in the human body. Spikes, tremors, quiet warning signs. I recognized one when I saw it. So I didn't reply, didn't forward. I simply sat in that chair, surrounded by the hum of machines that didn't know how to care, and I made a decision. Not to protest, not to confront, just to wait. Because when people choose silence to take something from you, they rarely imagine how dangerous your silence can become. Henry Falk always spoke like he didn't want credit. "Amabella," he said once, palm open in a mock surrender. "You're the brain. I'm just here to steer the ship." Back then I believed him. He was new, charming in a practiced way. The kind of man who used first names quickly and leaned forward when you spoke like every syllable you said fascinated him. He asked questions, took notes in meetings, and made sure to say things like, "I'm just trying to catch up," or "Your framework is genius." I almost felt bad for him. That was before the shift. Before my name started disappearing from calendar invites, before I walked into a product demo and found him presenting my roadmap like it was something he stumbled onto during a weekend brainstorm. He was subtle, strategic, never erased me outright, just replaced me in slices. At first, I told myself it was organizational noise. New leadership always reorganizes, rearranges, redefines. But this wasn't chaos. This was choreography. 3 months ago, he couldn't explain the data pipeline between Pulse Sync's modules. Last week, I heard him describing it verbatim in an investor call, down to the analogy I used with the legal team. Think of it like a translator for the body, reading signals your heart sends before your mind even knows. Word for word. I didn't even flinch. Not anymore. But what pulled the thread loose wasn't ego. It was ethics, buried in the latest testing notes. Build 794 was a flagged component, MT Sync, short for Mind Trace Sync. The module we'd shelved 6 months ago, the one that captured biometric signals beyond heart rate, brainwave alignment, emotional response curves, the one flagged as unethical by internal compliance and quietly removed. And now it was back, not under discussion, not labeled beta, just embedded. I reread the changelog 3 times. The commit was made on a Sunday, quiet day, no engineering meetings, just a single line reintegrate, MT Sync module for passive adaptive response modeling, clinical dry deliberate, and the signature H. Falk. He hadn't mentioned it, not in meetings, not in reviews, not even in passing, because he knew. He knew what it was. He knew what it meant. He knew it wouldn't survive another ethics review. So he slid it in behind polished slides and practiced smiles. He made me invisible, then made that reappear. It wasn't just betrayal. It was desecration. I sat at my desk, USB warm in my hand, and stared at his name like it had grown teeth. Henry Falk. The man with clean hands, the kind who never leaves fingerprints. Only the damage I didn't confront him. Not when I confirmed the commit signature. Not when I traced the integration of MindTrace back to a single Sunday push. Not even when I realized the timestamp matched exactly the night my salary vanished. That kind of symmetry doesn't happen by accident, but I didn't storm into his office, didn't slam down my laptop. I went silent. The next morning, I archived the Pulse Sync PR threads, removed myself from the Slack Shard launch planning channel, didn't announce it. Just faded. I stopped replying to the brand team's emails, ignored calendar invites from comms. When someone pinged me in the company-wide thread, I let it sit. Unread, unanswered. Let them assume I was overwhelmed. Wounded. Checking out. Let Henry believe he had succeeded, that I was shrinking into the background like he intended, but I wasn't disappearing. I was watching. I'd spent 14 months building Pulse Sync from zero. Its data infrastructure, the adaptive sync loops, even the compliance checklist we submitted to the FDA. I knew every file path, every version, every line of code that had ever mattered. So I went back, one folder at a time, through archived Git commits, flagged test notes, shared drives everyone had forgotten. And there it was, buried, but not hidden. The line of code that called the MindTrace module, uncommented live buried, inside a harmless wrapper function, as if it had always been part of the package. I traced the changelog backward, found the commit, saw the author. H. Falk, date Sunday, time, 8:47 p.m. The same minute my salary was cut. I leaned back in my chair, eyes burning, hands still. I didn't feel rage. Not yet, just confirmation. It was never about budget. It was about removal, about pushing me out before I could see what he was pushing in. I opened my drawer and pulled out the paper blueprint, my original design for Pulse Sync, the one I printed after the final ethics review. The page was worn now, folded twice. The corner smudged with a coffee ring from a night I stayed until 3 a.m. alone, rewriting the response delay algorithm after QA flagged inconsistencies. The stain had bled into the fiber. Permanent, just like the damage he was trying to cause. I smoothed the page flat, ran my finger over the signature line. Mine Legal had approved it. Compliance had signed off. It was clean and it was mine. Let them launch his version. Mine still lived in my drawer, unchanged, untouched. And when the time came, it would speak for itself. There's a certain power in knowing the truth before anyone else does. Not the kind you brag about, the kind you bury. Keep warm. Guard, that's what I did. I didn't shout, didn't whistleblow, didn't schedule a last-minute meeting with legal or barge into Henry's office with a printed audit trail I gathered. I printed the original blueprint again. The same one from my drawer, still bearing the faint ring of a long-forgotten coffee stain. I matched it line for line against the current build where mine ended, his began. And the difference? A single embedded module, MT Sync, tucked deep inside an innocuous folder. Its name changed just enough to slip past lazy eyes, but the function was unmistakable. Mind Trace, the feature we rejected. The one flagged as a privacy risk. The one banned from launch, unless we wanted to face a full-blown ethics review. I found the original email chain from compliance subject line. Final Mind Trace module rejected. Privacy risk. Beyond acceptable threshold time-stamped. Signed, I downloaded the PDF, stored it offline twice. I archived the Slack thread from 6 months ago. The one where I wrote, "If this gets into production, we're opening ourselves up to litigation." Or worse. And then found it, the commit Henry's again, same Sunday, same time. A silent insertion, never peer-reviewed, never announced. They didn't know, not legal, not QA, not even the engineers who pushed the build to demo. But I knew what was clean, what was contaminated, what was mine, and what was his. I stored everything, the emails, the logs, the timestamped documents, the approved version, the tampered one. I encrypted the folder and backed it to an external drive. Then another. One went in my apartment safe, the other into a dead storage email under a different name. I wasn't preparing for war. I was preparing to survive one. There's a difference. My silence wasn't surrender. It was insulation from noise, from panic, from retaliation. I didn't want revenge, not yet. I wanted leverage. And in a company that rewards spotlight and speed, no one ever suspects the ghost. The one who stops speaking, stops showing up, stops playing along. Until the room gets too quiet. And they realize the only person who knew where the wires ran isn't standing on the stage with them. She's somewhere else, waiting. The lights were unforgiving. White, bright, unnatural, they poured across the glossy floor of the Virex conference atrium like floodlights on a polished crime scene. Reporters milled by the catering tables. Investors checked their phones. Clients from Seoul, Berlin, and Sao Paulo clustered by the product demo wall, sipping pale champagne from sweating flutes. The Pulse Sync launch was being billed as the future of predictive health. And Henry was already posing for photos, shaking hands with the board. His navy suit tailored within a millimeter of its life. If you didn't know better, you'd think he invented the whole thing. I stood near the edge of the room, half in shadow, holding a clipboard I didn't need. I wasn't on the program. I hadn't been invited to speak. I hadn't even been copied on the run of show, but I was there. Because I built this thing, and because I knew what they were about to celebrate. Wasn't clean, the music shifted, something electronic and triumphant, and the big screen behind the stage came alive. Founding Pulse Sync Team. It read in bold photos appeared one by one. Design lead, firmware architect, data integration. Each name carefully placed, each role surgically credited. And then came the frame where I should have been. But instead of me, they'd used someone else, a junior dev. Fresh out of grad school, someone I'd mentored last spring, taught how to troubleshoot sync delay, how to read baseline stress patterns, how to speak with legal. Her photo was bright, full of promise. Her title, Cognitive Systems Liaison, my title or what used to be. I didn't gasp, didn't flinch, but something inside me went quiet in a way that felt permanent. The camera panned lazily across the room, catching polite applause. Then it found me. Just for a moment, the shot would probably be cropped out in editing. Boutin, that brief frame, I stood still. Expression unreadable, eyes locked on the screen. And in my sleeve pocket, my hand curled tight around the USB. The room clapped harder as Henry took the stage. He smiled, that perfect smile. "We built this," he said together. I watched him speak with the smoothness of someone who never had to stay past midnight rewriting broken algorithms. Someone who never had to defend an ethics clause. Someone who hadn't earned what he was holding. No one noticed the empty chair near the back. No one noticed me not clapping. But I was there. Every line of that product, every safeguard, every real feature, they were mine. And I wasn't angry, not yet. I was something colder, something quieter, something they wouldn't see coming. I'd spent weeks imagining how it might happen. A pause too long, a question no one rehearsed for. A crack in the performance, hairline thin but fatal. And now it was here. The demo began, like they always do. Glossy rehearsed a string of vague promises, dressed up in urgent language. Henry stood beneath the Pulse Sync banner, his voice smooth and practiced. "We believe the human body speaks first," he said. "Our job is to listen sooner." Slides flickered behind him, animated heartbeats, color-coded graphs, mock user scenarios. The room nodded along. Investors leaned forward, photographers clicked. It was working. Almost until a hand went up near the middle row. Not rushed, not confrontational. Just calm. "Excuse me," the voice said, a woman late 40s. Gray suit, professional stillness. She wore a conference badge that read Dr. Lynn Horvath, Neuroethics Advisory Board. Henry smiled. "Yes, go ahead, Doctor." Horvath didn't return the smile. She tilted her head. "Can you clarify how Pulse Sync gathers emotional response data?" A-Beat, and specifically, are users made aware. The device reads neural patterns tied to emotional shifts. The silence landed like a dropped glass. You could hear the air move. Henry blinked. Cleared his throat. "Well, our device uses standard biometric inputs. Heart rate, skin temperature, oxygen saturation." "That's not what I asked, Doctor," Horvath replied, voice still even. "I'm referring to neural wave interpretation, the kind used in your mind trace sync module." There it was, the words spoken aloud. In public, Henry froze for just a moment too long. "I didn't move, didn't speak. I stood near the back clipboard, steady heart slow." Across the room, PR managers shifted in their chairs. One lowered their phone. Another scribbled something and passed it down the row. Henry tried to pivot. "Our current version doesn't store that kind of data. It's passive adaptive." And a second voice cut in. This one male deeper, more direct. "I'm a physician," the man said, standing. His name badge read Dr. Aaron Villani, Clinical Advisor UK, Biotech Union. "I'm also a potential user. I'd like to know what this thing does to my brainwaves before I wear it." Henry opened his mouth. Nothing came out, just a dry, useless inhale. The silence thickened. Eyes turned. Someone in the front row lowered their camera. The applause reel had stopped playing. I pressed my thumb against the USB drive, still tucked in my sleeve. The questions had begun. The bow had started to bend, and I was no longer imagining how it would happen. I was standing inside it, exactly as I'd planned. I hadn't planned on speaking. That was never the goal. But silence, I'd learned, has an expiration date. And when the room turned on itself, when Henry stumbled, when the weight of a single question became too heavy for Charm to carry, that's when I moved. 3 steps. That's all. From the edge of the crowd to the clearing in front of the demo table. No drama. No raised voice. No emotion. Just presence. Henry turned when he saw me. His mouth opened slightly, just enough to let panic through, but no sound came out. He knew I didn't look at him, didn't look at the cameras. I looked straight at Julia. Aang. She sat like a statue at the front of the room, crossed legs, hands still. Eyes sharp. Lead strategist for the Southeast Asia Division. The one who mattered. I held up a single sheet of paper. "This," I said evenly, "is the final approved design, reviewed by legal, signed by compliance. Time-stamped 5 months ago." I stepped forward and placed it gently on the table beside the ceremonial pens. Black ink signatures, blue compliance stamps, the kind of document that leaves no room for improvisation. The version in today's demo, I continued, contains a feature that was explicitly rejected: mind trace sync. It was removed for ethical reasons, and it was not authorized to return. No one moved. I felt the whole room shift, not with noise, but with gravity, like the air itself had thickened around my words. Julia's fingers touched the page. Her eyes scanned the header, the approval grid, the legal notations. When she looked up, she saw me, not as a support engineer, not as the woman behind the curtain, but as the architect of the thing she almost trusted. I met her eyes and said, "The only thing I came to say, I'm not here to expose anyone. I'm here to protect what I built with everything I have." That was the knife, not sharpened with malice, just precision. Because the truth doesn't need to scream to cut. Behind me, Henry shifted his weight. I heard it more than saw it. That little sound a man makes when the spotlight moves, and he realizes he was never standing on solid ground. Julia closed the folder. She turned to Henry without looking at me again. "We pause the deal," she said flatly, "until we receive a clean, verified version directly from legal." And that was it. No shouting, no accusations, just cold professional air settling. Where applause had almost lived, I stepped back. No triumph, no smile, just the kind of stillness you earn when you've held the line and let the lie fall into its own shadow. It ended the way frost creeps across a window, quiet, steady. Impossible to stop once it starts. No alarms, no gasps. Just a soft unraveling. A technician at the back slowly reached for the audio controls and faded the music out. The screen behind Henry dimmed to black mid-slide. A photographer lowered his camera. PR staff stopped typing mid-post. Henry stood frozen at the edge of the stage, still holding the microphone. But no one was listening. The room had already moved on. Julia. Aang remained still. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't glare or gesture. She simply closed the folder Amabella had handed her, deliberate final, and laid her palm flat on its surface. "We don't sign with companies that can't account for their own code," she said, voice crisp. "Especially when that code handles user data. We're done here." The words landed with a chill. No one contradicted her. From the side of the room, a man in a slim charcoal suit, general counsel, likely moved quickly to Henry's side. They exchanged a few low words. Henry's posture buckled just slightly, the tilt of a man trying not to fall while standing still. Then wordlessly, they led him down the corridor, behind the stage, toward the private boardrooms where reputations go to bleed. The door closed behind them with a soft but definitive click. A second later, someone pulled the blinds. That was the signal. The event was over. Not officially, but unmistakably. No announcement was made. No "thank you for coming," just the slow dispersion of a room that had seen something it couldn't unsee. Attendees began gathering their coats. Someone set a champagne flute down on the edge of a table still full. A young assistant unplugged a spotlight. No one spoke to Amabella. No one needed to. They had seen, not just the documents, but the difference between a man who chased cameras and the woman who quietly held the truth. She didn't smile, didn't soften. She just stood there, clipboard at her side, invisible again. But not forgotten. What she had done hadn't earned applause, but it had stopped a disaster, and that in this room was the closest thing to recognition. As she turned toward the hallway exit, she didn't glance back. The building's HVAC kicked on overhead, soft, mechanical, and beneath it all, silence reigned. The elegant, devastating kind, like snow falling on a battlefield after the last sword has dropped. No one stopped me, not at the front desk, not in the elevator, not even in HR. By the time I walked in, they already knew. The air was too quiet, the smiles too thin. People passed me like they were sidestepping a crack in the floor. I didn't bring a box, didn't clear my desk. Everything that mattered had been gone for weeks. All I had was a plain white envelope, unsealed. I sat across from the HR coordinator. A woman I'd never seen before, likely borrowed from another floor, and slid it across the table. She glanced down at the single sentence inside. I'm not leaving because I'm hurt. I'm leaving because I proved who I was without needing anyone's permission. She didn't respond, didn't ask for elaboration. She just nodded slowly, like she'd expected more words, and was surprised to find none. I stood, no handshake, no farewell coffee, no goodbyes. Some exits don't need ceremony, just closure. The hallways outside were quiet, neutral, the same plants, the same stale lighting, but they didn't feel the same because I wasn't carrying the same weight anymore. At the end of the corridor, I passed the glass display wall. The LED still looped the Pulse Sync launch promo voiceover, polished visuals perfect. Its slogan pulsed beneath the logo in clean white font, Pulse Sync. We see you. I paused. Only for a second, then let out a breath. I hadn't realized I'd been holding, and said barely above a whisper, not anymore. There was no bitterness in it, just clarity, like a window wiped clean after the storms passed. They had taken what they thought mattered, titles, meetings, credit, but none of it built Pulse Sync. I did. And when the moment came to stand for it, I hadn't hesitated, I hadn't begged. I hadn't burned the building down, I'd simply held up the truth and watched everything false collapse around it. Now I was walking away, not from a job, but from the illusion that I needed that room to matter. That staying was strength. That silence was weakness. I had stayed long enough to finish what I started, to protect what I built. And now I was choosing the door. Not out of defeat, but because freedom once earned stops tasting like escape and starts tasting like arrival. The call came 7 days later. No small talk. No apology, just clarity. Amabella, Julia said, we're moving forward with Pulse Sync, not through Virex with you directly. There was a pause, not from hesitation, but respect. You held the line, she added, and we trust the hands that held it. The contract arrived in my inbox that afternoon. No fluff, no vague clauses. My name appeared first, my terms, my equity share. Clear percentages, defined protections, and no fine print tucked into legal fog. I read every word, not because I didn't trust them, but because I trusted myself to guard what I'd earned. Not just the work, the standard behind it. This time, I didn't skim to the signature line. I studied it line by line, paragraph by paragraph. Not with paranoia, but with the precision of someone who finally knows my value doesn't live in someone else's approval. It lives in the boundaries I refuse to compromise. By the end of the week, the headlines started to shift. Virex announces strategic restructuring. Founding member removed. Amid internal review, Pulse Sync relaunches independently. Henry's name disappeared from the website. No formal scandal. No public disgrace. Just a quiet erasure, the same kind he once tried to write me into. And I wasn't interested in revenge. This wasn't about him anymore. That night, I sat in my small apartment, mug of coffee warm in my hands, windows open to a city that no longer felt like a stage I had to earn my place on. Outside lights flickered across high-rises. Inside peace settled without asking for permission. I used to think what I wanted most was to be seen. But now I know. Being remembered for the right thing is the only legacy that matters. I don't need a statue. I don't need an award. I don't even need a thank you. What I have is better. A signature on something I believe in. My name first. Not to be famous, but to be true. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or quietly replaced. Remember this: you don't need to fight to belong. You don't need to scream to be strong. And you don't need their forgiveness to walk forward. Just hold the truth. Guard your name, and when the moment comes, sign only what honors your worth. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. Have you ever stood up quietly and changed everything? Like, share with someone who needs to hear it, and follow this channel for more stories of silent power, quiet justice, and undeniable strength. Your story matters. We're just getting started,